Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you must have learned marketing management somewhere. In this final installment, we're going to talk about primary marketing research. Now, if you recall back to a segment a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we discussed secondary market research. And the goal there was to generally identify whether or not we were putting our efforts towards something that was going to be valuable. But we didn't really get specific about our brands. Now that we've done a good deal of legwork in terms of identifying appropriate target segments, constructing products around their needs, figuring out how to distribute and promote to these people, it's time for the marketing research rubber to hit the road. In primary marketing research, we put our ideas to the true test with our customers. We do so through things like depth interviews, focus groups, surveys, and also sometimes experiments. In all these techniques, we want to focus on something called empathy, which is to truly and deeply understand our customers' needs and avoid injecting our own personal biases into their experiences and opinions. In design thinking, for instance, we learn to take an ethnographic approach. This product, this brand, this marketing message is not your baby. It's okay if somebody tells you that it's ugly. Our goal at this point is to analyze and deeply understand our customers, not to persuade them at this time. If you find that the intel says that you're not doing a good job, this tells you that you should change direction before you invest a whole lot of money, time, and other resources in doing the wrong thing. Other keys to these techniques include making respondents feel comfortable, making them feel motivated, reducing things like memory taxation, ensuring that you've got a script or a plan in place that has a sequencing of questions that will more deeply drive at the issues that you're trying to get at. In all cases, we want to make sure that we pick times and places for these studies that is going to make it easy for respondents. We want to make sure that we reduce both physical strain and psychological strain to make sure that people are most motivated to help us out with our research. We want to make sure that we're getting good data. To assist this, we do things like provide snacks and beverages so that people aren't thinking about how hungry or thirsty they are while they're trying to participate. We want to make sure that they've got comfortable furniture to sit in. We also want to make sure that the moderator or the interviewer is dressed in a similar fashion to those people who are participating. Psychologically, we want to assure people that their responses are either going to be anonymous or not going to be judged, that there are no right or wrong answers in any of their responses. We're all just so used to taking tests. People are also generally more comfortable when you explain the process that they'll be going through up front. We also want to ease participants into a conversation using things that we call burn-in questions. Now, these questions are basically very easy to respond to and help get the participants in the mindset of what it is that we want them to be talking about. For example, if you're researching preferences for furniture, you might start out by asking questions about furniture that people currently own, what they like, dislike about that furniture, what they would change if they could. This helps to get them into furniture world or household world or whatever world it is that you're trying to get them to think about without all of these other distractions from the rest of their lives. In all research, ask demographic questions last. Pause the video and think about why this might be the case for just a second. First of all, demographic questions are relatively easy to answer. So while somebody is still mentally adept, you want to get the really valuable questions out of the way. It's not going to mentally tax somebody at the end of a survey or an interview or a focus group if you ask them demographic questions. They're relatively simple to fill out. Second of all, these things are less valuable than the other questions that you have to ask. So you want to make sure that you get the value-added data information out of the way first before you move on to simpler, less valuable things. Third, if demographic questions go up front, it might cause people to identify with a particular group as opposed to providing their own personal opinions about something. Keeping things simple and succinct increases motivation and subsequently completion, particularly in surveys. Apply your own timeline to how long it is that you would tolerate going through a particular exercise, and then think about overlaying this onto participants in a study of yours. It's usually about 30 minutes for a depth interview, 30 to 45 minutes for a focus group because there's more interaction, more participants, and more engagement, but only about 5 to 10 minutes for a survey. It also helps to have some sort of stimuli, visual, audio that you can present to people that will increase their engagement. This will prolong the amount of time that you can take with any particular research technique. Depth interviews are typically one-to-one, face-to-face types of meetings, even when they're being done online. Whereas focus groups allow for engagements of multiple participants together. Typically, 8 to 12 people allows for enough diversity of thought without having too many people to interact with and control. The advantages of these techniques are that moderators or interviewers are able to adapt on the fly their scripts and go down particularly interesting or unexpected avenues of learning. To do this effectively, we need to have dynamic, responsive moderators or interviewers who are capable of spurring conversation with people using open-ended styles of questions, but also be able to bring people back if they start going down rabbit holes. Make sure that you're not using questions like yes, no, or rating style questions here. It's also important to try to record these sessions so that the moderator or interviewer is not spending all of their time trying to take notes. It also helps because you can see body language and all kinds of other aspects that you wouldn't be able to see if all you did was take written notes. It is really hard, if not impossible, to take notes that fast. One of the biggest reasons, again, to do interviews or focus groups is to be able to find the unexpected and gain rich detail. This is not a confirmatory exercise where you say this is exactly how the state of the world should be. Depth interviews allow you to go deep into a single viewpoint, whereas focus groups allow you to have multiple participants kicking around ideas off of each other, which is great for innovation and ideation. Some additional concerns that show up as a function of this, though, in focus groups are dominant members, introversion, extroversion, and also groupthink. Now, dominant members are people who like to have the limelight cast on them. They dominate the conversation, often to the attempted exclusion of other participants. Now, a way that you can deal with this, along with introversion, extroversion differences in participants, is to make sure that you go around and address each participant in a focus group distinctly. In addition, groupthink, whereby people just consistently agree with each other and you're not provided with a breadth of information, can also happen. To deal with this, moderators often use a technique called the devil's advocate. And this is where you make it acceptable, even desirable, for participants to disagree with each other, to counterpoint something someone else has said. There are a number of ways that you can do experiments, often what we call A/B testing. So do you like the blue version or the red version of this product? Do you like the layout of this website or do you like the layout of this website? Now, regardless of whether we're talking about interviews, focus groups, surveys, or experiments, we want to make sure that at the end we thank participants for participating in our research. Let's take a look at an example of an interview and also a focus group in action. All right, on to surveys. Now, surveys typically follow depth interviews or focus groups and are meant to statistically validate or confirm findings or suppositions that came out of the data from the focus groups or the depth interviews. Usually we're using a lot of quantitative, closed-ended styles of questions, like ratings from 1 to 5 of a particular thing. We also need at least 30 participants. Now, why 30 participants, you ask? Because the statistical rule of thumb in terms of finding significance is N of 30. Additionally, we need to make sure that our questions are accessible to a broad audience of people, unless we're doing something very practitioner-focused where jargon is acceptable. In this sense, we often write our survey questions at a 5th grade reading level to make them as accessible as possible. Because remember, in a survey, unlike a depth interview or a focus group or an experiment, you aren't going to be sitting there able to clarify what you meant by asking something. In setting up a survey, you need to be mindful of the statistics that you're going to be using. Are simple frequencies of things going to be acceptable? Do you need to compare something against a benchmark? Or are you trying to compare perceptions of different groups to each other? We typically do ratings on a 1 to 5 scale because the added value of moving to a 1 to 7 or 1 to 9 statistically is very limited. It also is difficult for our respondents to think about the subtle nuances of meaning when you move to a 1 to 7 or a 1 to 9 type of scale. So for instance, in a 1 to 5 scale, we often have strongly disagree, disagree, neutral or neither disagree nor agree, and strongly agree. The additional subtle nuances of having somewhat agree or somewhat disagree don't add enough value for us to cognitively load our respondents in that way to make them think about it. We also have scales called semantic differential, where we have something like active versus passive on one end, high quality versus low quality on the other end. And we can also have things about frequency that start with never and then ramp up to all the time. If you're going to do a basic benchmark comparison, all you need is the question like, how much do you dislike shopping online, and the benchmark to which you're going to compare it against. For instance, you need to have a 4 out of 5 for people to say, yes, we really like shopping online, or maybe we want to find out that they don't like shopping online. It's very important, though, to set the benchmark a priori in advance of the test so that you can't sit there post hoc and go, well, we're kind of close enough to where we need to be and fudge the numbers. To evaluate this kind of comparison, we have something called a t-test. And it's something you might have learned about in a statistics course to this point. This is where we take the benchmark, which is fixed, and we compare it against the average response on the 1 to 5 scale against that benchmark. So it's a subtraction or a difference. We then divide this by the range of responses, the square root of the variance, which is the range of responses, divided by the number of respondents. Typically, if we're looking at a 5% probable error rate, what this means is that we're looking for a t-value for significance of 1.645 or greater, or that it's less than negative 1.645, so that it's outside of that range to say, yeah, there's less than a 1 in 20 shot that you made the wrong call here. If your goal is to make a comparison between two groups, you need to have the focal question, like how likely are you to buy highly branded shoes? And then you also need some categorical breakdown from the demographics section of a survey to be able to separate those groups out and identify them distinctly, such as millennial, Gen Xer, or baby boomer. Here again, we can evaluate with a basic t-test, but instead of having a fixed benchmark, we now have two ranges of responses. So we would have the average of response group number 1 against the average of response group number 2. Below that, then we also have a distribution of both of these. So we're dividing by the variance in the respondents of group 1 and the variance in the respondents of group 2 in order to get our t-value. Now, fortunately, the same rules apply whether you're talking about a single benchmark test or you're talking about a two groups comparison test in terms of the 1.645. If you find that the value of t is greater than 1.645 or that it's lower than negative 1.645, therefore it's out of that range, it is significant, that is showing that there is a significant statistical difference between those two groups. Otherwise, you can call them as having about the same types of responses to that question. To reduce frustration, cognitive load, and to increase motivation in a survey, we want to cluster related questions together. For instance, if you're going to ask a bunch of questions about pricing and perceptions of pricing, you want to put all those questions together. If you want to ask about product features, you want to put all of those questions together. You also want to ensure that there's ample white space or that these are separated by page so that people can retool themselves cognitively in order to best respond to these questions. You don't want people jumping back and forth in their mindset trying to answer different types of questions. You want to block all these things together. In addition, we want to avoid leading or loaded questions. Now, these kinds of questions are things that would guide people down a particular avenue of response. We're after true opinions here, not to persuade people. Finally, we want to avoid something called double-barreled questions. And the biggest indicator that you're asking a double-barreled question, which would have multiple different perceptions of response, is that you have the word and or you have a bunch of commas in there. So for instance, how much do you like Washington and Lee University and the city of Lexington? You may like Washington and Lee a whole lot and not be very fond of the city of Lexington. So which part of that question is the respondent actually responding to? There's a sample survey available to you in Canvas. This concludes our video segments on marketing management. Thanks so much for joining me, and best wishes for a bright and successful future. In this final installment, we're going to talk about primary marketing research. Now, if you recall back to galaxy far, far away. And this research gave us a general direction with which to point our efforts, but it didn't be specific with our brand. In primary marketing research, we put our ideas. In primary marketing research, we put our ideas to the test, to the true test with our customers. We want to make sure that we get good data. So we do things like provide snacks and beverages so that people aren't thinking about how hungry they are while they're participating. So participants aren't striking by hunger, having comfortable furniture. You also want to think about the moderator or the interviewer and how closely related they are to the person that's through the interview process. And nope, not getting it. Okay. Let's put our hands back together like we do, like we do. Let's put our hands back together like we do, like we do. Oh, I need a Coke. Enjoy the breath of life with Coke Zero. I know what you all are thinking. Why isn't he drinking Red Bull? That's a fantastic question. It's because I don't have any Red Bull right now. We want to make sure that we're getting good data. Some things that will assist this are providing snacks. Psychologically, I am verklempt. Psychologically, I am vapid. I don't know. You've heard of rapid fire? I'm vapid fire. Yeah, that's me. It's the Wild Wild West. Jiggy, 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 wild, wild west. People are also more comfortable. People are also more comfortable. No, I don't like that. Step, cha-cha, step, cha-cha. Honestly, I didn't think I was going to screw anything up today and there would be absolutely no outtakes, but that's clearly not the case. To evaluate this sort of test, we have something called a t-test, which you might have learned about in a statistics. Here it is again, statistics. Statistics. Even when they're being done online. While as, I just made up a word, made up a set of words.